May 10th, 1940. The war is still in its infancy, measured only in weeks and months. The proud armies of France, bolstered by British troops, have endured the phony war, while the German war machine has decimated Poland, swiftly taken Denmark, and is now advancing through Norway. However, the conflict is about to become very real for the Allies, as a storm is brewing from the Channel coast to the riverside town of Sedan, and what unfolds next is anything but phony. Welcome to what the world refers to as Blitzkrieg. I'm Indy Nidell, and I invite you to our World War II miniseries, 10 Days in Sedan, where we will delve into the German advance through the Ardennes, the fury of the Reich, and the renewed clash between old adversaries at Sedan, the crucible where the destinies of the Axis and Allies intersect. Join me as we investigate the battle's progression and its consequences. Exciting times lie ahead in the coming days. But let's begin with a detailed examination of some of the German forces that will participate in the offensive. At the helm of the German command structure is Gerd von Rundstedt, who oversees Heeresgruppe A, Army Group A. This group consists of four main components: Gunther von Kluge's 4th Army, Wilhelm List's 12th Army, the 16th Army led by Ernst Busch, and most crucially for our purposes, Panzergruppe Kleist, commanded by Ewald von Kleist. It is Panzergruppe Kleist that will serve as the armored spearhead of Army Group A, and at this moment, it stands as perhaps the most formidable ground force on the planet. In terms of armor, the Germans have concentrated their resources heavily here. Kleist commands over 41,000 vehicles, including 1,200 tanks. This represents half of the total German Panzer force. Additionally, there is a significant number of motorized infantry. Some of these soldiers travel in half-tracks, which offer some protection against small arms fire and shrapnel from artillery and grenades, but the majority are still transported in soft-skinned trucks. To support this vast metal fleet, the group comprises approximately 134,000 personnel. However, the strength of Panzergruppe Kleist is not merely a matter of its size and armament. In fact, most German tanks are not necessarily superior to their French equivalents. The true power of Group Kleist lies in its groundbreaking doctrine. It represents an unprecedented experiment in armored warfare that has never been fully realized before. Historically, the Panzer divisions have functioned in support of infantry armies constrained by their pace and planning. Yet Kleist's force shatters this traditional approach. For the first time, armored units are set to spearhead the offensive, not merely as tactical supplements, but as a primary operational force aimed at achieving strategic breakthroughs and deep exploitation. It's worth noting that while the Western media frequently uses the term Blitzkrieg to characterize the conflict in Poland and potential developments here, there is no formal German doctrine by that name. Regardless, this armored strategy is revolutionary, but the more traditional officers within Army Group A, including Rundstedt and his Chief of Staff Georg von Schuldenstern, harbor doubts about the independence of armored units. The officers of the various infantry armies share this skepticism. They have labeled Panzergruppe Kleist as a cuckoo's egg, inserted into the nest by the high command. Consequently, Kleist's forces are not even afforded equivalent status, with the Panzergruppe positioned somewhere between a corps and a field army. Similarly, for reasons that may also pertain to camouflage, Kleist himself is referred to simply as Befehlshaber, or commander, rather than Oberbefehlshaber, or commander-in-chief. Furthermore, Kleist and his troops lack their own assembly areas. Instead, they are effectively guests of the infantry armies, as those forces establish their positions in the staging areas near the border with Luxembourg. The guiding principles for Kleist's forces are speed and boldness. This operation is, indeed, a significant gamble for the Germans, but should it succeed, the rewards will be extraordinary. Allow me to introduce the components of Group Kleist. This group is made up of 3 motorized corps: At the forefront is the 19th Panzer Corps, led by Heinz Guderian, who is the spearhead of this operation. Under his leadership, Guderian commands the 2nd Panzer Division, led by Rudolf Weil, the 1st Panzer Division under Friedrich Kirchner, and the 10th Panzer Division under Ferdinand Schall. Additionally, Guderian has the Grossdeutschland Regiment at his disposal. His objective is to cross the Meuse River at Sedan. Following him in the second echelon is the 41st Panzer Corps, commanded by Georg Hans Reinhardt, who intends to cross the Meuse at Monthermé. Reinhardt oversees the 6th Panzer Division under Werner Kempf, along with the 8th Panzer Division and the 2nd Motorized Infantry Division. In the third echelon, we find the 14th Motorized Corps under Gustav Anton von Wiedersheim. He commands 3 motorized infantry divisions. The northern flank of Panzergruppe Kleist will be secured by Hermann Holtz's 15th Panzer Corps, which is part of Gunther von Kluge's 4th Army. This corps includes 2 panzer divisions, the 5th under Max von Hartlieb and the 7th under Erwin Rommel, as well as an infantry division. The traditional foot soldiers, referred to as leg infantry by the Germans, from the 4th, 12th, and 16th armies are set to follow behind the panzers. The Germans are confident that they have a strong chance of overwhelming the unsuspecting defenders and establishing a foothold on the western bank of the Meuse River with minimal resistance. While this plan is undeniably risky, it is a calculated gamble that could potentially secure victory in 1940. The Germans are convinced that the Allies overrate the significance of the Ardennes forest and the Meuse River as natural defenses. They believe that the Allied forces in this area are limited in number and of relatively low quality, making a push of this scale seem unrealistic. If a rapid breakthrough can be achieved, even across challenging terrain, the German panzers could spread out and advance into France without facing significant opposition. The choice of Sedan is particularly strategic, as it offers the Germans a combination of surprise, speed, and familiarity, all while being carefully balanced with practicality. However, this plan does not enjoy unanimous support, facing considerable opposition from within the German high command. Hitler is notably supportive of the Sedan strategy, convinced that it is the location where the French will least anticipate the primary assault. Esteemed military figures like Guderian, Erich von Manstein, and Alfred Jodl lend their backing, yet there remains fierce dissent. General Fedor von Bock, commander of Army Group B, articulates his concerns. "You will be advancing merely 10 miles from the Maginot Line with the flank of your breakthrough, hoping the French will remain passive. You are congesting the tank units onto the limited roads of the Ardennes mountain region as if air power were non-existent, and you expect to conduct an operation all the way to the coast with an open southern flank stretching 200 miles, where the bulk of the French army is positioned. As is customary, the air war commences before the ground conflict, with the Luftwaffe quickly establishing dominance in the skies, partly due to the Allies' oversight. Guderian's 3 divisions are prepared to advance along 4 routes. The units executing this plan from north to south include the 2nd Panzer Division, the 1st Panzer Division, and the 10th. The 1st Panzer Division is the one that initiates the action. The operation officially commenced in the late afternoon of May 9th, when the division departed from its assembly points along the Moselle River, approximately 40 kilometers south of Koblenz. From that point, the troops traveled throughout the night towards the Luxembourg border. To maintain their alertness, the division's logistics officer distributed the first of the 20,000 Pervitin tablets he had for his soldiers. At around 4:35 this morning, the lead troops of the division began to clear the concrete barriers set up by the largely defenseless Luxembourgers. Approximately an hour later, the initial German forces have surged across one of the bridges spanning the Our River near Wallendorf, successfully disarming the border gendarmes. After demolishing border barriers and defenses, German engineers commenced the construction of bridges to transport machines and materials. This construction process is expected to take around 2 hours. Meanwhile, a unit from a motorcycle company, along with 3 armored reconnaissance vehicles, speeds across Luxembourg towards the Belgian border at Martelange, aiming to arrive in 2 to 3 hours. Upon reaching this location, they unexpectedly encounter intense fire from the well-entrenched Belgian troops who occupy the high ground on the opposite side of the Sauer River. Hermann Balck, the commander of the 1st Rifle Regiment, arrives at the scene and instructs his motorcycle company to launch an attack across the river to dislodge the enemy from the hill. This operation is a straightforward infantry assault, with German riflemen advancing uphill. There are no tanks, no Luftwaffe air support, and no artillery available. Although the reconnaissance vehicles are equipped with 20mm cannons, they prove ineffective against the Belgian forces, who have a T-13 tank armed with a 47mm cannon. Consequently, the German infantrymen are left with only their rifles, grenades, and a limited number of machine guns. The attacking force, an infantry company consisting of about 100 men, is roughly equal in strength to the defending force, which is the 4th Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Ardennes Light Infantry Regiment. This unit has fortified itself within pillboxes and field fortifications, shielded by minefields and obstacles. The operation was to be executed on the move without any prior preparation. This involved wading through the Sauer River, advancing through Martelange, and then launching a frontal assault uphill across 200 meters of open ground against the positions of a well-entrenched enemy on the hill overlooking the city. Remarkably, this seemingly suicidal mission culminated in a significant success. When the Germans unexpectedly charged up the slope, the Belgians were taken aback by such erratic behavior that many of them fled. Shortly after, the Ardennes Light Infantry began their retreat. The 1st Panzer Division moved further west from Martelange through the Sauer Valley towards the village of Boudange, which was once again defended by the Ardennes Light Infantry. The motorcycle and reconnaissance units faced 2 choices: wait until evening for the arrival of the Panzers and artillery, along with the availability of aircraft, or initiate a swift attack to capitalize on the element of surprise. They opted for the latter and launched their assault just before 1 in the afternoon, but were met with a barrage of fire from the defenders. The Germans fell back, leading to a tense standoff that lasted throughout the afternoon. Repeated infantry assaults proved ineffective. The Germans managed to deploy some 37mm anti-tank guns and 75mm light infantry guns, yet these struggled to breach the robust Ardennes houses. It was only when they brought in 88mm guns that they could finally overcome the Belgian resistance, and after fierce house-to-house combat, they captured the village around 7 p.m. The Ardennes light infantry held their ground for 6 hours. While that is commendable, it also raises questions. Their mission was not to engage in a prolonged fight, but to delay the enemy and then retreat, just as they had done at Martelange. So what prompted them to entrench themselves and defend Boudange as if their lives depended on it? The answer lies behind enemy lines. Early in the morning, the Germans initiated Operation Navy, an audacious airborne drop intended to accelerate the advance of the 1st and 2nd Panzer Divisions. The entire operation was somewhat improvised. Most of the Junkers 52 transport planes and airborne troops were stationed up north with Army Group B, prompting Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring to propose the use of Fieseler-Storch liaison aircraft. These small planes are capable of taking off and landing in very short distances, eliminating the need for paratroopers. The drawback is their small size, necessitating at least 100 of them to move 2 companies from the 3rd Battalion of the Grossdeutschland Infantry Regiment to Nave and Vitry. The orders for the men are to sever signal communications and message links along the roads that connect Neufchâteau to Bastogne and Martelange, hinder the arrival of Belgian reserves from the Neufchâteau area, and seize pillboxes in the rear. The operation kicks off around 6 a.m. However, things do not proceed as planned, and many German troops find themselves far from their targets or isolated from one another, yet they still manage to create significant disruption behind the Belgian lines by early afternoon. Unfortunately, this strategy backfires on the Germans. At 2:20 p.m., Belgian command issues a complete withdrawal of their forward units, including the 5th Company stationed at Pudange. The order is dispatched, but due to the German troops having severed the telegraph wires, the message gets lost somewhere along the way. Consequently, Major Maurice Bricard and his men hold their ground, believing they are still required to maintain the line. They continue to fight and effectively delay the German advance far more than anyone had anticipated. Ultimately, Operation Neve backfires, causing a holdup for the 1st Panzer Division at Pudange, so by evening they are close to Neufchâteau but have not captured it. They are falling behind schedule. The situation is less eventful, or at least less notable, on the northern and southern routes of advance. On the northern route, the 2nd Panzer Division initially faces delays at Neuve, but they succeed in clearing out the Ardennes light infantry and the Belgian roadblocks. At this stage, the French have sent units into Belgium following a request from Brussels. Thus, on the southern route, the leading elements of the 10th Panzer Division come across 2 regiments of the French 2nd Light Cavalry Division near Arlon. The French cavalry, armed with Hotchkiss light tanks and Panhard armored vehicles, present a considerable threat to the Germans. There are various perspectives on the fighting here, with some asserting that the French suffered significantly more, while others argue that casualties are evenly distributed between both sides. However, the key takeaway is that the French are retreating from Arlon and moving behind the Semois River. German units have now engaged with French forces in the Ardennes. But what about the Allies as a whole? What strategy are they employing? The Allies are implementing what they refer to as the Dietl Plan. This plan entails a push into Belgium utilizing some of their finest troops. This decision is partly based on Allied forecasts regarding the direction of the German offensive, which they still anticipate will come through the plains of Flanders, leveraging the open and flat terrain to deploy the majority of the German panzer forces. There are both advantages and disadvantages for France and Britain in adopting this approach. On one hand, it would keep the primary battle lines away from France itself, while also fulfilling the diplomatic and geopolitical obligations of supporting Belgium. Belgian and possibly Dutch forces could even be integrated into the Allied command structure, sharing the responsibility for defense. Additionally, the best available troops for the Allies would be concentrated in one area rather than being dispersed along the defensive lines, thus simplifying preparations for a counteroffensive. This strategy, which aims to involve around 30 British and French divisions, is set in motion today, May 10th, as these divisions begin to flow into Belgium with the onset of the German assault. As we know, the main German armored advance is focused on the center of the line through the Ardennes rather than along the coast. So have the Allies already lost the battle before it has even started? Not necessarily. The Maginot Line defenses are not impenetrable fortresses in isolation. Instead, they function in tandem with Allied regular forces to establish a flexible and robust defense system. Each segment of the line is designed to hold and delay the German advance long enough for fresh divisions to be deployed to ultimately repel the enemy. The French are not planning to remain in their fortifications forever. Rather, they aim to utilize them to slow down the German advance before launching a counteroffensive. Clearly, stationing their top units far to the west will not facilitate a swift response to assaults along the Maginot Line. However, it is believed that the defenders can still manage to buy sufficient time for troop redeployment. What time frame are we discussing? The expectation is that it would take approximately a week for any German forces moving through the Ardennes to reach the Meuse, followed by at least another week to transport enough heavy artillery and bridging equipment for a proper crossing. This means it would be 2 weeks before the Germans can even contemplate initiating their attack. How long can the defenders withstand the assault once it begins? Another week? 2? 3? This provides ample opportunity to bring reinforcements into the area. Even some German generals, including Army High Command and OKH Chief of Staff Franz Halder, agree with this rough timeline. He believes there is no possibility of a crossing occurring before May 19th at the earliest. If the German offensive is halted here, what could the repercussions be? The Allied forces gathering in Belgium would launch an attack on von Bock's Army Group B with relative ease, while the bulk of the German Panzers would be trapped between the Meuse and the Ardennes forest. All of this underscores the urgency of the situation. The Germans estimate that within 4 days, the French will be able to position enough troops at the Meuse to impede their advance. Guderian instills the motto in his troops: in 3 days to the Meuse, on the 4th day across the Meuse. This urgency is not solely driven by the enemy, however. To resolve the strategic disagreements with the infantry commanders, Rundstedt has implemented a compromise that looms like the sword of Damocles over the group. Panzergruppe Kleist can only maintain its independence as long as it stays ahead of the infantry. Should it stumble and allow the following armies to catch up, it will be forced to integrate back into the conventional structure. Therefore, Guderian's tanks must advance as swiftly as possible, not only to trap the enemy, but also to stay ahead of their own superiors. The challenge lies in the sheer size of Panzergruppe Kleist. If all the vehicles were lined up on a single road, they would stretch over 1,500 kilometers, enough to span the entirety of Germany to Königsberg in East Prussia. To successfully cover the 170-kilometer journey from their assembly areas through the Ardennes to the Meuse River, every drop of fuel, every tire, and every spare part must be perfectly positioned at the right moment. It is von Seitzler, the chief of staff of Panzergruppe Kleist, who must tackle this logistical challenge. Although Seitzler is not a panzer warfare specialist, he has demonstrated exceptional organizational skills, despite having only 2 months to devise a plan. He demands complete logistical autonomy from the slower infantry divisions trailing behind. In a manner akin to an infantryman, each vehicle is required to carry its own supplies, a concept Seitzler refers to as the rucksack principle. Fuel consumption for the advance is meticulously calculated down to the last liter. All vehicles must enter Belgium fully loaded, with additional gasoline stored in jerry cans at rest stops along the way. To ensure the column continues moving without interruption, Seitzler devises a rolling refueling system. Trucks filled with fuel are integrated into the marching formation, distributing jerry cans to crews as they pass by. Empty cans are discarded and retrieved by follow-up teams. Kleist, Guderian, and Seitzler may find their names etched in history depending on the outcome of this war, but it was another renowned German who famously stated that no plan survives the first encounter with the enemy. Despite Seitzler's diligent efforts, the planning begins to unravel swiftly on May 10th. The second echelon units are now encountering the tail end of the first echelon, which is already running 10 hours behind schedule. By noon, Guderian's 3 panzer divisions are engaged in combat in Belgium, yet the majority of Reinhardt's Panzer Corps remains east of the Rhine, and Wiedersheim's motorized corps hasn't even departed from its assembly area in Germany. For the time being, Wiedersheim will stay put, as this day has come to a close. German forces are making progress, but coordinating everything as planned will be an exceptionally challenging task. There are numerous moving components, countless chances for setbacks and delays, and that's before the French even enter the picture. You might be wondering, what French? You've hardly mentioned them. Patience is key. In our next discussion, we will examine the French units advancing into Belgium and their initial encounter with the wave of steel approaching them. We will also take a look at the forces in and around Sedan and what resources they have available to confront Guderian's panzers if they manage to reach the River Meuse. How will this all unfold, I wonder? Will France and Germany descend into another brutal war of attrition, or could the Germans actually wrap things up in less than a week? Stay tuned to discover the outcome, right here on World War II. And since you've made it to the end, I'm going to take a chance and assume you enjoy these types of mini-series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.